morning, everyone. Welcome once again to our Sunrise Project weekly call and support group. We're so happy that you are here with us in this safe space filled with compassion and a desire to heal our families and ourselves first. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I am super delighted this morning to have with us one of our resident experts. We call him Dr. Rick Wallace. He's been with us, I think, for the entire 4 years that we've been around, and he is such a welcome, incredible resource. Let me share a little bit about who he is and some of his incredible accomplishments. Dr. Wallace has authored and published 26 books and maybe 27 now, or 28.
It's 27 fully, 28 officially drops on the 31st of this month.
Gosh, okay. So next time I come, next time you are here, it'll be 28 books. That's amazing. So
I promised
congratulations.
I promised thee I was going to get an updated bio. That's on me.
No worries at all. No worries at all. And we talked a little bit, I have a few updates. But to keep it moving, he has published almost 28 books, including his latest work, or one of his latest works, Academic Apartheid, Critical Mass, The Phenomenon of Next Level Living, Born in Captivity, Psychopathology as a Legacy of Slavery, The Undoing of the African American Mind, and the Miseducation of Black Youth in America. He has written and published thousands of scholarly and prose articles and papers. Sorry, I'm trying to let people in. And with the overwhelming majority of his work surrounding the enigmatic issues plaguing Black people on every level. Papers that he has published include Special Education as the Mechanism for the Miseducation of African American Youth, Racial Trauma and African Americans, and on and on and on. Dr. Wallace was born in the late 60s to a 15-year-old mother and an absent father, and he was taken in at the age of 9 months by his great-grandparents, and they legally adopted him. They legally adopted him when he was 2. Dr. Wallace is a proud father of 13 children, ages 38 to 10, and a 5-year-old grandson. So it's been 3 years because when we met your grandson, he was 2 for the first time. And that was a wonderful moment as well, and how to showcase patience and calmness with that young man. So here we are today, and Dr. Wallace is back with us on the topic of shedding the trauma and family drama for this Sunday morning. And so please welcome Dr. Rick Wallace. Happy you're here, Dr. Wallace. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Happy to hear. We'd love to start with an understanding of when we talk about shedding the trauma and family drama. What do you mean by that exactly? How are we defining that?
Well, defining family drama is simply another way of saying generational drama. I mean, trauma. It's another way of saying generational trauma. And what that is the projection of trauma throughout generations within the same family structure, regardless of the origination of the trauma itself. In this case, the vast majority of people that will probably see this video will have some connection to slavery within the U.S. or the subsequent years that followed, like 12 years of Reconstruction, Black codes, convict leasing, and then, of course, Jim Crow. All of these times were extremely traumatic and stressful, especially for Blacks in the South. But then we have the movement of Blacks from the South to the North to escape it, but taking the trauma with them. So then we have it also pretty much everywhere you can think now in the United States. So the generational trauma works in 3 ways. There's the cognitive part of it, there's the behavioral part of it, which is most recognized, acknowledged, and observed. And then there's the part that very few understand, and that's the genetic part of it. So when I started to study generational trauma, it was for the purpose of giving an answer to a suggestion that started to rise very heavily in the early 90s and into the 2000s. And so back in the 90s, there was an argument that started to come forth that always had been around, but it was gaining force. And it's, you guys have been out of slavery for now for over 100, at that time, something like 120 years. And it's time to get over it, let it go. Um,
Mm,
Something that Jews will never be told to do for the Holocaust. But we were told to forget it. We were told to move on, let it go, stop using it as an excuse. And we talked about multi-generational trauma, but no one really truly delved into it beyond the surface. And so I decided to jump on the backs of Dr. Naeem Akbar, Dr. Amos Wilson, and pretty much right alongside Dr. Joy DeGruy, who wrote Post-Traumatic
mm-hmm,
Slave Syndrome.
mm-hmm,
Dr. Howard Stevenson out at the University of Pennsylvania as well. And so in the research, I came across an article about the Jewish Holocaust, and that was this term epigenetics in it. And I started to understand that the body keeps the score. Dr. Basil van der Kolk, probably the foremost expert in trauma, started to expose us to that. And so I started to do the research, and then I got into epigenetics specifically, and it's amazing what happens. But anyway, the simple explanation, and then I'll turn it back over to you. The simple explanation of how we're impacted. It's easy to understand behavioral. You see somebody doing something in your family, it becomes a habit for you because you do what you see. It's social learning theory. Uh,
mm,
Emotionally is if I'm traumatized, I am going to behave in a way that's probably going to traumatize other people, hurt people. But genetically is we're experiencing it. What happens here is if I experience trauma, I don't just experience it emotionally. We tend to think of everything being mental, and psychology in its truth is more than just what we think. It's a big part of what we think, but how is our thinking impacted? And the fact is the body impacts the thinking, believe it or not. And so genetically, we are impacted, and the body experiences the trauma first before the mind could ever catalog it. That's why when something happens that is scary or whatever, the hair on your head stands up, you get this tingly feeling. The body's already reacting to it before your brain realizes what goes on. And the thing is, every cell in the body keeps that, and as it reproduces itself through the process of mitosis, it just creates another cell exactly like itself with the same memory. So then generational trauma is the first of all the tagging of that, and then the passing down, but also on the back end, the experiences we experience now that are traumatic have a genetic impact, an epigenetic impact. Epigenetic means simply on top.
mm,
Epi is on top of the genes, and it impacts the way the genes read and interpret your DNA. Your DNA tells you everything from your temperament, um, how you're going to approach things, the color of your hair, your size, your complexion, all of these different things. But it also tells your body how to fight off um, certain diseases. It tells your body how to respond to certain stressors. And when you have trauma, that tag that comes from the trauma that sits on top of the gene distorts how it interprets. So it will down regulate genes that are, say, for instance, your immune system, and up
mm-hmm,
regulate genes or turn on genes that are related to cancer, diabetes, lupus, and a bunch of other diseases. And so it's not just about our behavior. It's not just about us acting out. It's not just about us being depressed, or it's also about our overall health. So when we talk
mm,
about generational trauma or family trauma, we're talking about a very complex dynamic that I just really ran through and stumped all over. But I understand we're pressed for time. But we're talking
no,
about
no,
something
please.
that, at least on the surface, everyone needs to know. There's the Surgeon General of California, Dr. Nadine Burke, is a champion for adverse childhood experiences, which is another element of component. I'm actually doing a series of symposiums here in Houston for the Harris County Sheriff's Office reentry program to reduce recidivism, and talking about how the
Mm.
absence of the parent actually has an epigenetic influence through adverse childhood experiences on the children. And
That's
so,
ACEs, correct? What you're saying
correct,
right now is
correct.
ACEs,
Yes,
people
it's no
call. Mm-hmm,
ACEs. And so
mm-hmm,
a child with 4 ACEs, everything everything is one ACE. If you get a ACE score for every adverse childhood experience that's listed,
Mm-hmm.
um, any type of physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, um, a parent that's addicted to a controlled substance, um, a parent who is incarcerated, parents breaking up and getting a divorce, and a few others. And so when you take four of those, almost everybody has at least one.
You're
It,
right.
it's just the way things are in this world today. But you take four, that child is 12 times, that child throughout the course of their life, not just while they're going through it, that child through the course of their entire life will have a 12 times, is going to be 12 times more likely to attempt suicide, will be four
And
times
that's with an ACE score of a 4.
a
That's saying
four.
you have four
So
of those
for
things,
those things I just mentioned, and
any four of those things.
any
Okay.
four, and
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna be 12 times more likely to attempt suicide,
Mm.
2.5 times more likely to develop ischemic heart disease, which is the #1 killer in America, 4 times more likely to develop cancer. And this is so prevalent that when I started to write my findings, I actually got contacted by an international organization, which is a conference on epigenetics and cancer, to actually speak in Germany, because people are starting to realize the impact of epigenetics outside of somebody just freaked out for no reason. When we think about somebody who's suffering with trauma, that's what we think about, the traumatic episode, when they're experiencing what is most of the times referred to as traumatic memory, but also implicit memory. What it means is you're literally reliving the event. It's not remembering the event means that I remember what happened. It elicits some emotion, but the threat is no longer there. When you are having an implicit memory or a traumatic memory, you're reliving it and the threat is still present. So all the fear is there. And so, that's the thing that people see. But we definitely are at a point now where we have to explore the greater thing of the long-term health implications for it. So it's really, really, truly a pretty dynamic thing to engage, but it's something we need to talk about. But there's a simple approach to addressing it, and I hope we get into that as we move forward.
Before we go into the simple approach, I want to just double click on the ACEs. I know we spent a call previously talking extensively about ACEs, and you shared a great organization called, or a place to find information, acesaware.org. So I've put that in the chat for people to understand if you want to understand more about the list that Dr. Wallace went through in terms of some of those factors. That's in the chat, acesaware.org. But would love for you to just mention there's some things that we can do, or some simple ways we can understand this further or help deal with it. I'd love to have you share more on that, please.
Okay, so the first thing is awareness. So the ACEs is a good place to get started, but when we're talking about generational trauma, what we have to understand is we're talking about not just what's going to happen when we start looking at ACEs, but what's happening in our family as a whole. So I often say when speaking that we struggle with being efficacious in our attempts to raise ourselves because we don't understand how things work. We have developed a tendency to be told what to do a lot. Even when a situation like this, my area of expertise gives me a platform to talk, but anybody's pursuit of a better situation for themselves can start with me, even working with me directly. But it also means that they need to gain a desire to understand themselves. And that means reading, that means researching, that means actually thinking about it. And so that's the first step, is awareness and educating yourself on what's going on. The moment that you do that, you start to understand why things happened and why things have happened. And you start to give people a little more grace, so to speak. But this trauma isn't an excuse to misbehave. It's an explanation of the misbehavior. The goal is to develop the capacity to move away from it, to shed it, as evidenced in the title. And that comes from changing environments, because a big part of epigenetics that I didn't explain is that you can, and a lot of the studies were done with identical twins over time. And you could take an identical twin, which means that they came from the same ovum that split. So they have the same DNA, same fingerprint, same everything, right? And so you can take them and they're identical. You know, if you're not around them all the time and know the small little nuances about their appearances and their behaviors and their voices, you will think that you won't be able to tell them apart. But if you put them in two distinct environments, one a positive environment, one a negative environment, you start to see the physiological impact on their lives. One ages quicker, one is more sickly more often, and on and on and on, and you can see it. And that's the environmental situation. That's something we can absolutely control and manage once we understand it. So there are certain types of environment. There's the environment you're in at work, there's the environment you're in at home, and then there's the environment of your emotional awareness. So emotional intelligence, the things that tell me why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling versus me just simply reacting to the feeling. Most of us are reactive to our emotional feelings. Something happens, if something hurts us, we just bust out and we bust into tears. We don't evaluate, assess. If something angers us, we're about to check somebody in whatever way we check somebody, because that's the reaction that comes as a part of the trauma that we have normalized and many times take pride in. It's like, man, I checked that, it's like that meant I handled my business, because that's how we have power now, is to check someone who angered us without dealing with the reason why they were able to anger us in the first place. The most beautiful state that I've ever entered into my life is the ability not to be angry. And it doesn't mean I don't recognize what you're doing. It means you will not impede upon my peace.
Mm,
I will recognize what you're doing. I will process it, and I will make a decision based on what's best for my peace, not what makes my anger feel better. And what it does, it means a lot less stupid decisions. And I'm being just real direct, but when you make a decision from emotions, it doesn't turn out well. See, emotions are indicative mechanisms of our thing. They anchor us to how we feel, and I mean what we do and how we interpret things. But in truth, our emotions are indicative, meaning that when you have an emotion, it's telling you of your current reality. It's telling you what's happening. If you are angry, it means somebody wronged you. If you're sad, you've probably experienced some type of loss, or you're feeling lonely. If you are frustrated, it means there's something complex. It's just all these different feelings to associate with a current reality. It doesn't tell you how to deal with the reality. It tells you the reality is present. Now you have to step outside of the emotion and determine what you're going to do. But most people just take the feeling they're having and act out. And never is it more prevalent than when someone is literally truly traumatized. And so the next thing is being situationally aware, but also creating an environment that will produce a level of peace. Because as I was discussing with Kelly before we came on, we will have all these conversations about why things happen because of epigenetics, because of cognitive and behavioral influences that ultimately result in this passing down of trauma, and the overall long-term health implications from it. But what we don't get enough to talk about, and what I love about the science of epigenetics, is that when you get past all of the stuff that's wrong, you realize that it's reversible. It's about environment. It's about how we think, our cognitive environment, our spatial environment, and our connectivity, the people we spend time around. When we govern those things, when we literally steward those things and manage those things in a way that we're in control of where we're at, what type of situation we're in, from our job situation to our relationships, um, definitely home. It's nothing like getting to your house and pulling up in the driveway and having to sit there 30 minutes because you don't want to go in. Now,
Wow.
that's
Hmm.
supposed to be your sanctity. That's supposed to be your safe haven. That's the place you retreat to when it does get stressful outside. So if it's stressful at work and it's stressful at home, I promise you there's a biological, um, neurobiological, and genetic process happening that's taking away from you. You're becoming more inclined to become ill. Your what we call psychological resilience is being lowered, and all that means is your psychological resilience is your ability to deal with stressors and maintain your sanity and your peace. That is, if it's constantly under the stress, it's declining. And the same thing with trauma. Every person going through the same event isn't traumatized by it. Why? Because people at different points and levels in their psychological resilience. If somebody that's been through a lot will probably be more likely to be easily traumatized because they've already gone through a lot. It's like if you go in the gym, the first set you hit, you're gonna knock it out because your body's fresh, your body hasn't been through anything. It's those last sets where you realize, man, I might not have enough in me. Why? Because you've hit your threshold. You're hitting fatigue. That's a fatigue threshold. But you have a trauma and a trauma threshold to where something else happens right now, and I don't have time to really deal with what all I've been dealing with. It's going to cause something to happen. And every time a person is traumatized, it isn't this big boom imprint like everybody thinks when they think of PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, which normally happens in one big emphatic event, 9/11, soldiers going over to war and seeing their friends blown to smithereens. One event could have you messed up, and you need to have the type of counseling and intervention that can help you get through that. Well, a kid growing up every day and having to navigate gang violence just to get to
Hmm.
school, just to get home, only to come home and find his dad hitting on his mom,
Hmm.
traumatized.
Hmm.
And then that type of trauma is going to end up being complex trauma. Why? Because it's going to happen over and over again. And it only has to happen once, but it's happening over and over again. So not only is the child being traumatized, they're being normalized into their trauma.
Hmm.
And what we have is a generation of people that come from a generation of people that come from a generation of people that believe trauma is normal. That's just how we are.
Or that
That's
don't talk about it at all.
right, right. So, and then the ones who want to talk about it get ostracized by the family. They
Right.
become the black sheep, and and normally they're the one that's probably been victimized the most too, which is the next step. Stop re-victimizing victims because of concerns about how somebody in the family is going to look or how the family is going to look in general. One of the biggest problems that I've uncovered in my study is our unwillingness to protect our children. And we protect the predator far more than we protect the child. And it's amazing how often this happened. And it can be the behavior and the response can be traced back to slavery. Men
Hmm.
was Black men were the most at threat. Black men and black boys were most at threat. And two dynamic things happened. When it came to men, our women will automatically step in front of our men to defend them, um, lie for them, do whatever they had to do, because they knew if the truth came out, or if they didn't step in between, what was going to happen to the guy. It was not going to be good. They probably weren't going to see him.
Right.
When it came to the sons, and I see it now, even in today, and Dr. Joy DeGroot talks about this. But what happens with the son is sons were often sold away from mothers. So mothers would literally degrade their sons in front of anybody with power. Oh, he's dumb, he's stupid. Oh, this little boy, any kind of compliment played to the son would be downplayed, not because they didn't think he deserved it, but because they felt if the compliment meant there was
Hmm.
value, that value would be leveraged for money and he would be gone. So they made him
Hmm.
as worthless as they possibly could in the eyes of the people in power. And you'll see it now. Somebody say, your kid is so smart. Oh, he's so bad. Like, but they don't know why they're doing it now because it's an inherited behavior in response. But it is where it started was if I make him look like he's a problem, they'll leave him alone. Uh, Versus
Mm-hmm.
if they see some kind of gift or skill in him that he does very well, and or that he's a good breeder because he's very, very physically healthy, I'm gonna lose my kid. And so all of these different things are going on. But when we look at it now, the men are protected, especially coming up when my grandparents came up. It didn't leave the house. Whatever's going on, it didn't leave the house. It was going, we work it out. And I grew up in a time and in a community in the city where a lot of people were migrating from Louisiana. So there was a large population of people from Louisiana. And I don't want to make it seem like it only happened in Louisiana because it doesn't. I've studied it in a lot of different places. But in this community, there were at least three people in the 3 block radius of the subsect of the community I lived in the 3 block radius. There were at least 3 kids who were giving birth to their little brother and
Mm.
their little brother and their son at the same time.
Mm.
And it wasn't no police showing up, wasn't anybody doing it. It was like everybody in the neighborhood knew because they were gossiping about it. But nobody
Mm-hmm.
was talking to the authorities because number one, the authorities weren't trusted. But the people who suffer is the little girl who's having the kid, and then the kid's going to grow up, and that kid's going to
Mm-hmm.
really have problems. And then now you're seeing how it's perpetuated that way. And then add on the fact that there are genetic things that are happening underneath that nobody sees. That's also going to be um, uh, uh, um, influential in what's happening. So those are some of the things. Be aware, listen, be willing to hear when someone's saying something, be an ear, be less judgmental of behavior that you don't understand because everybody is coming from somewhere. Nobody just stops somewhere and goes to the left. No one, even the person that's doing things that are very antisocial in our community and in our homes, that we look at and go, why did you do that? What were you thinking? All these things. It comes from somewhere. We may not
Mm-hmm.
understand it, and we don't have to co-sign it, but we do have to understand that there's no such thing as something just happening. Everything has a source. Everything has an origin. I've spent my life finding origins because if I can find the origin, I can find the cure. Um,
Mm.
and the cure is environment. We've got to put our kids in the environment. And for a lot of the people that'll be on this particular podcast, and before I forget, I promised Dee that I would do this. I've agreed to um, host a session with nothing but our men
Mm-hmm.
uh, where we're gonna,
Awesome.
where we're,
Awesome.
where we're going to talk about the things we don't get to talk about or the things we feel we can't admit in open. We're going to get to put it in. It's a no judgment session. It's bring it. Let's talk about it. Let's unpack it. And we're going to find out in that session just how much we're internalizing our pain, which is making us sick. It's a part of the reason that our life expectancy is lower. There's some other things that influence it, but we literally, and then one other thing that I will encourage is the bonding that women tend to do better anyway. And you guys are actually built for it, literally from a neurological perspective and the way that your brains work. Our brains work differently. Men run front to back, which means that we tend to literally get our identity and our sense of fulfillment from accomplishing things. Your brains work
Mm-hmm.
right to left, where you tend to focus on how you feel and you have a higher capacity for discernment. So your spirituality is higher in capacity, and it was meant to be that way because we have to go out and do things traditionally and historically. We have to go out and do things that require us to be able to work with our hands, be fulfilled by what we bring back to the house, and so all these things matter. But we're going to get a chance to talk about these things, and I wanted to make sure I lived up to my promise to Dee that I was going to bring that out. But we're going to really unpack some things because these guys are internalizing so much. And um, there's a song that I shared with Dee, and I'm not going to start trying to quote it or anything, but there's a song by this artist out of Canada named Dax, and the remix has Darius Rucker in it. and they're talking about, the name of the song is To Be a Man, and it's just line after line of explaining how we feel inside. And for a man, another brother bought it to me, knowing what I do. He said, "Man, you gotta hear it. You gotta hear it." We finally got our theme song, and it's basically that. Then he did a mega remix with like about 7 different artists from different genres, different races, and no matter what race, the men had the same thing. You don't hear us. I remember David Mann sitting on
Mm-hmm.
stage with Tamron Hall talking about uh, going through his depression. And he said he would sit in his office for hours at a time and cry. And he
That's right.
said he felt like he was drowning and nobody could see him drowning and nobody would know he was drowning until he had drowned.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of men. And we won't admit it because we don't want to appear weak. And all of
That's
these
right.
things are things that we have to have conversations about. But I did want to bring that out. But ultimately, we've got to gain understanding and we've got to get behind programs that allow us to gain an understanding and provide resources that can work with families on an individual basis, work with families on a um, conglomerate and community level. But there may be a program I don't know about, but the one I'm doing with Harris County right now um, is one in a million. And
Mm-hmm.
it's important to understand why I did it because I'm not in this just dealing with our people. I'm predominantly our people because we are the majority population, but that's why I did it. Is our men make up 6% of the population in this country. We make up 40% of the population in prison, and we are the majority. And we have to look at that and we can't accept the cultural explanation of we're just criminal minded, we're just inherently violent. All of these things, we're intellectually inferior, and all of these different things that have no scientific foundation, but is being pushed out there, and nobody's asking what's underneath the surface. And we have to start with this trauma. We have to shed it. And then on the flip side of that drama thing, the drama thing is a part of being able to recognize as an individual that while my family is important to me, my health and my ability to actually be productive in this world is what I have to lean into because I have a responsibility to
Mm-hmm.
God to live up to the level of my design. And now I've got to literally reconstruct my design because it's been broken down by hurt, by pain, by fear, by anxiety, by stress. And now I need to rebuild it. So I've got to take care of myself. And in taking care of myself, I'm going to remove myself from anything that challenges my peace. And what that means is I'm going to find a lot of times that the people that I started with aren't with me. And it's a very hard thing because we use family as a tether and we use it
Mm-hmm.
unconditionally. And what I mean by that is no matter what I do to you, I'm still you fill in the blank.
Mother. Mm-hmm.
Uh
Mm-hmm.
sister, brother, we
Mm-hmm.
family. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at what time are you going to start acting like my family? Because that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at what type of environment you facilitate in my life. And that's the ultimate for that. So I don't know how much clarity I brought to it, but I'm ready to fill as many.
Very clear. Yeah, I would love to open up the floor for questions. I thought it was interesting. I think what I heard you say, really when we were talking about what kind of steps can you take to try to mitigate the family trauma and the intergenerational trauma. You talked about awareness, seeking awareness for why things have happened, creating an environment focused on peace. You talked about cognitive, spatial, and the people around you. I thought it was really telling, your example that you shared about sitting outside for 30 minutes. And it should be a place of peace and respite. And then the last piece was listening more, and being less judgmental. So did that capture, I think, the summary
Yeah,
pretty much? Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. It was very helpful. I would love to have, if anyone has any questions for Dr. Wallace or any thoughts on this morning. Um, You can come off of mute by hitting *6, or feel free to join us here on
Good,
the Zoom. Good morning.
good morning. This is Susan. Hi, Dr. Rick. Good to hear your voice. I have a question about, you spoke a lot about Black men and their trauma. Can you speak a little bit about Black women? I mean, the direction that this generation is headed in, and the over sexualization, they got to get paid, got to get money, got to be with a guy that has money, and the pressure it's having on our young men as well, with social media and with the images and what they're seeing now, and how we as, I'm a cool auntie, or even the parents or uncles, like, how should we, like, we just look at them and shake our heads. I know there's got to be more that we can do, but how can we fight against this imagery and this culture that, is being pushed to them? How can we actually help to redirect that, some positivity or something for them?
Wow, you really are trying to unleash me here. I'm going to do everything I can to keep it concise because it's an area that I am extremely passionate about. As much work as I've done with Black men, I actually started predominantly working with women because you couldn't get a Black man nowhere near a professional. And so I came to understand that we had a problem over 20 years ago, because almost every client that came to me, and after we peel back the layers, and that's kind of how I work. I start with where we're at and I go backwards, uh, a layer at a time to get to the source. It gives them time to develop trust. It also gets them to a point to where they're talking without actually filtering. And I mean, like, at a very high number, I hadn't really been tracking it at that point. We got back to childhood, and that was childhood sexual abuse. Um, and so I started to reach out, and it was one or two things happening. And I would say it to my colleagues sort of jokingly. I'm like, either we have a real problem, or every woman that's ever been molested as a child is coming to me. And what I found out is they were having similar issues, and there wasn't any real extant empirical data on it by any real true um, institution of study. So we sort of kind of triggered it and started looking at it. And what we found out is, on the liberal side of things, 60% of our women were in some way sexually assaulted as a child. On the conservative side, taking into a number of different considerations on reporting and things of that nature, the conservative side said 40%. So regardless, we're close to 50% on the conservative side of things. And that's happening. So we're dealing with that issue. So I have a lot of love and respect for my sisters, in the sense of where they've gone and what they've been through and what they're fighting through. And it also comes from being reared by my great grandparents. I tend to have a lot of old-fashioned values, and I see things from a traditional family setting, but I've also studied it. And here's the thing. And I just addressed this whole thing because there's this big thing going around now about Drea Michelle dating a kid here in Houston that plays for the Rockets. That's her son's age. And it's not the first time she's dated and had a child by a professional athlete. And she openly and candidly talks about it. So everything now is the body in the bag. That's where we're at right now. When you talk about over sexualization, everything, I broke it down. That's my thing. The body and the bag. The bag is, we have commodified the Black man, specifically the Black man, more than anything else. All men are commodified to a certain extent because we're supposed to be providers. But the Black man, all he's judged by is how many zeros there is in his bank account. Nobody's looking at how strong he is. Can he cover you emotionally? Can he cover you psychologically? Can he provide leadership? Can he teach you anything? Because he's supposed to be a leader. He's supposed to be the person you look at and say, if it's going to get figured out, he'll figure it out. He's supposed to be that guy. But all that matters is how much money he has. And you don't have to have character to get money. You don't have to have a sense or a desire to love your kids to get money. You can have money and you don't make a good husband or a good father, but That's what everybody is focused on. So now you have a bunch of guys out here, a lot of them false presenting that they've got the bag, and others who have the bag but are too young to understand anything, and they're buying into it as well. And so now there's this culture that says that you get it, but then there's this idea that in order to get a good man, the guy with the bag, no longer the guy who knows how to talk to you, knows how to treat you, knows how to edify you, cover you, and take care of you, just the guy with the bag. You got to have the body. You got to be a 9, very at the worst, an 8.5. You got to be a 9 or a 10 in order to get the body. So now everybody's traveling to the the DR. Everybody's traveling to the DR and getting cheap work done, and then coming back. And so now everybody looks like everybody else. And if you actually poll men, while we'll respond to it, we didn't ask for it, we don't want it, but it's the game. So everybody's playing it. And so you've got the body in the bag. The guy's trying to get the bag. The girl's trying to create the body so she can get the guy with the bag. And now it's elevated to another level. When, growing up and being, in an environment around being young and having more than the average young person your age, I can tell you that women seeing men and saying, I want a kid with him is not new. It's not going to be, it's nowhere close to the first time a woman got pregnant by a guy because she saw that might be a way for her. But back when I was coming up, if a girl purposely got pregnant for you and she saw that you had a path that you were going, she didn't want your money. She wanted you. She was going to let you take her where you were going. I'll give you a prime example. Savannah James, LeBron James woman. This, and to the both of them, I don't know their personal lives. I can't say what happens behind closed doors, but this kid had every reason to fail, and he held his family up and he kept it going. But when she did get pregnant, he married her, and that was the old way you do it. Okay, I'm pregnant, I'm gonna get married. Now she's on the radio talking about, when they ask her, do you see it long term? Well, I'm kind of liberal minded. I'm not into all that. I'm just kind of flow how I flow, do what I do. At the same time, this young kid who she's messing with has her name tattooed on his body because he's flowing with the emotion of it all, and she's doing what she does. And I'm not saying either one are right or wrong, and there's a bunch of people out there because we tend to flow with whatever the trend is instead of standing on principles. Most people, they grown, do what they want to. He's a grown man. Well, the problem is society is going to have to live with those broken kids. Society is going to have to live with what comes out of him when she finally dumps him. Society is going to have to live with the fact that she'll not be able to be a contributor to the development of females in any productive way. And he will end up being just a dude that starts to go, and for a lack of a better term, forgive me, run through women because he's hurt. He's going to try to soothe that with the thing that makes him feel good, which men do. The most powerful way a woman affirms a man is by giving herself to him. And when it's not done correctly, he starts to chase that feeling he got when he was with her because he never felt more like a man, because a woman surrendering something that is supposed to be so precious, she gave it to me. Now he just goes out and he starts seeking it, and he doesn't realize why the feeling goes away so long. It was because you were supposed to bond with the woman that gave herself to you. And so this is what happens. So what we have to do is actually start speaking the values we know of. We need to be aware of the outcome of this. The outcome is you can look back and start looking at the disintegration of the Black family nucleus starting in the mid-60s. And you can follow the decline of the family as in a number of different metrics, but specifically single parent households, and watch crime, poverty, violence, domestic violence increase. I mean, in direct correspondence with it, as we decline from 75% of our children being born to two-parent households to 75% being born to single-parent households, we saw the crime go exactly with the numbers. We saw the poverty go exactly with the numbers. We saw dropout rates, we saw violence, we saw incarceration. All these things are moving in direct correspondence. So we can't sit back and think that we can act in the world of antinomianism. Everybody doing what they want to do. It's not my business. And then think that there's not going to be a long-term outcome that's going to impact us all. This society, and I spoke on this when people asked me about Drea. And I said, you know, no judgment, but what we got to understand is number one, because that behavior comes from somewhere. And I don't know what it is. I don't know what's driving her. I don't know what she went through. So I can't judge her, but I can say the behavior isn't productive and it's not social. But what I did say is the very nature of this individualized mindset is a problem. Everybody's being pushed, be individual, be yourself. Don't worry about what nobody else thinks. The problem is we live in a society. We are social creatures. We are mammals. We are designed to work and operate within space with one another and be pro-social with one another to build things, to do things, to perpetuate our species. The problem is the very thing that's telling you that you should be individual is social. The social construct is telling you to be individual. But if you look at other groups, they aren't doing it, not in the same way. And so what we have to do, and then I'll do what we have to do is actually address it, be truthful about it. And it's not going to be popular. You're going to get a bunch of people that's going to push back because that type of behavior and accepting that type of behavior leads to the lack or the demand for accountability. And that's where we're at right now. We're in a world where nobody wants to be accountable. Nobody wants to say, okay, you know what? I have a responsibility to take care of whatever I create. Even if I didn't plan on creating it, I've got a responsibility to it, and I'm going to honor it to the end. I've got a responsibility to carry myself as a man, behave as a man, to move as a man. I'm not perfect. I'll make mistakes, but I have to be able to sit up and honor my responsibility in order for society to function at its highest state.
That was so agree on all of what you just said. I want to make sure we have time for you to answer this question that's in the chat, Dr. Wallace, and thank you for sharing all of that. The question is, how can we address the lack of policing equity so we can prevent the school to prison pipeline? What resources are available? And I know you've written extensively about this.
Right. I wrote on that on academic apartheid. Also, their paper, the disproportionality of special education referrals to Black youth. They start our boys to in the school to prison pipeline as early as 5 years old through referring them into special education so that they get IEPs and ultimately alienate them from the entire social construct of school, making school unbearable for them, and then they drop out. We know that once a male drops out of school, he's 5 times more likely to end up incarcerated at some point. And so the first thing is proper education in the early years. That's why I created programs that help to socialize Black males, because that's it. And it's starting to happen with our girls too, which is crazy. There's starting to be a spike in incarceration with them. But the reason, and that's coming from the school system as well, because they've criminalized behavior that we got suspended for. They're getting cases for. And so it's just starting that play. But the first thing is to properly educate and socialize the child before they ever leave home. Before they are 4 years old, they really need to know who they are. They need to know they're special. They need to know what they're capable of. They need to understand when they go out in that world, there's a part of that world that wants to diminish them because they benefit from them being diminished. And they need to withstand that. Then we need to insulate them as they go out into that world. We need to be the places they sink to when things don't go their way. Second of all, we need to be very vocal in how we deal with law enforcement. But you got to understand, law enforcement is governed by policy. So we then need to be talking about policy makers at the state level, especially, and how they define what can be done. The inequities are reinforced also by our culture. And that is something that I'm trying to crack now. So I've literally stepped into a zone that I was not normally welcomed into, because I have gone hard against law enforcement over the years. But there are people in there who actually care, and there are people in there who are actually doing work. You don't get to see them because they're not going to give them the spotlight, because they don't want to encourage it. But they are literally fighting for the right to be available to the communities that they are policing in a positive way. And so I've connected with them. I've gone on rides with them. I've seen how the public responds to them. We need to create that. We need to create a disruption in the blue wall culture where you can still be brothers, but you hold one another accountable. Then we need to sit up and be accountable. Now, here's the part that a lot of people are going to be very nervous about. We need to start holding our ministers and our churches accountable. Nobody has more power in the community and more capacity to service the community than the church. They have the funding too, $300 million a week. And the least amount of attention I get, my fallout with the church, I was a bishop in the church. My biggest fallout with the church was we're not serving the communities that we're in. Now we getting down inside the sanctuary, but the community right outside the church is where we need to be. And it's not happening. There needs to be credit unions inside of every church that's pulling in money from a community that funds the resurrection and the regeneration and the rejuvenation of that community, that provides educational resources for the children in that community, because public school systems are about to be a thing of the past.
All of that. And Dee has added, it will also take us holding administrators, legislators, and all the people we've entrusted our children to be accountable for their part in these broken processes. But I love what you said about our pastors, and that opportunity. We look at the positive. There's a huge opportunity to work with our pastors in our communities to make a systemic change. That's what I'm hearing you say, and I think that's a brilliant idea. Brilliant idea. Do we have any last questions or comments before we wrap up this Sunday's call, which has been really phenomenal and really helpful information? Any comments or questions from anybody? I do see that Dee has added the survey link in the chat, so please do that for us. And someone said this was so awesome, Thanksgiving. Thank you. So please fill out the chat. And just another reminder that Dr. Willis will be with our men hosting a men's only session in April. We will be sending out all of the information on that. This will be at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll be inviting everyone we know to come and have a private, safe conversation just for the men. So, and young men. So that is coming. Dr. Wallace, you're getting all kinds of wonderful feedback. This was excellent. Thank you. And exceptional, always phenomenal. Really appreciate everything you do. Would you like to share a last thought for our day and our week?
Just briefly, no matter how bad things are going right now, no matter how challenging and difficult things that you may be going through with your family, with your kids, with your spouse, with your job and your career, it may not look the way you want it to look or you always thought it should look, but if you're still breathing, you're still in the fight. And that's what you wake up every morning with: thanksgiving and gratitude for still being in the fight. And that alone will shift your energy. And it's a beginning of a healing process energetically that actually works to help reverse epigenetic damage. And so that's my thing. Wake up every morning knowing that I woke up, I'm still in the fight, and move to become the person that you're capable of being.
Move to become the person you are capable of being. I so love that. I really appreciate all the hearts, and I really appreciate you being here with us this morning. Always so incredible and helpful. So I will close us out with a brief prayer, and then I'm hopping on the road to get back to DC. Father, thank you for allowing us to listen and learn from Dr. Wallace this morning. Such an incredible topic of intergenerational trauma and family drama. Father, help us seek awareness and reframe our thinking. Help us have patience with our children. Help us create an environment of peace. Help us breathe. Help us give ourselves grace. Bless us with a released grip and control on our children and an increased focus on love and peace in our space. Help us surrender worry because we know you are in control. We also ask that you continue to cover us and protect all of our children. Keep them safe. Here's to a peaceful, powerful, positive, productive, and loving week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Have a wonderful week, everyone, and we'll be back next Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern. Take care. Thank you for being here.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
Thank you.